They say childhood is where life begins gently, where time moves slowly and innocence is allowed to bloom. But for some, childhood was never a place of softness. It was a responsibility, a silence, a quiet survival. What happens when a child learns to carry weight before learning to play? When maturity isn't a choice, but a necessity? There is a hidden story behind those who grew up too fast. A story not of strength, but of something that was quietly taken. Let's begin. There wasn't a single moment when it happened. No clear line between before and after. Just a slow, quiet shift, like daylight fading into dusk without anyone noticing. You may not remember deciding to grow up, but somehow you did. Maybe it was in the way laughter became softer, more careful, or how play began to feel unnecessary, even uncomfortable. While others were learning how to explore the world, you were learning how to read it. The mood in a room, the tension in someone's voice, the things people didn't say but expected you to understand. Childhood for you was not just about toys or games. It was about awareness, about adapting, about knowing when to stay quiet and when to step in. And slowly, without anyone naming it, you became someone who could handle things. But what does a child do when they are praised for being mature, when maturity was never meant to be their burden? What happens to the parts of you that needed to be held, reassured, protected, but instead learned to disappear? Because growing up too fast doesn't always look painful from the outside. Sometimes it looks like strength, like calmness, like someone who never causes trouble. But underneath that quiet strength, something else was happening. Not growth, but a gentle kind of loss. At some point, without being asked, you began to take on roles that were never yours to carry. Not loudly, not consciously, but quietly, almost instinctively. You learned how to sense what others needed before they ever said a word, how to adjust your emotions so they wouldn't become a problem for anyone else. And slowly, you became the steady one, the understanding one, the one who could handle it. Maybe you became the listener in a home where no one truly listened, or the peacemaker in a place where conflict lingered just beneath the surface. You noticed how your calmness brought relief to others, how your silence avoided tension, how your strength made things easier for everyone else. So you kept going. But in becoming the adult too soon, something subtle began to happen. Your own needs started to feel inconvenient. Your emotions, too much. Your vulnerability, something to hide, not express. Because when a child learns that love is maintained by being easy, quiet, or strong, they begin to believe that their worth lives in what they provide, not in who they are. And so you adapted. You became responsible, aware, reliable. But beneath that quiet responsibility, there was still a child, waiting, watching, wondering when it would finally be their turn to be taken care of. What looks like strength on the outside often begins as adaptation on the inside. Because the human mind, especially a child's mind, is not designed to break. It is designed to adjust. When the environment feels unpredictable, emotionally distant, or overwhelming, the brain quietly shifts into survival. Not in dramatic ways, but in subtle, intelligent patterns. You become more alert, more aware, more in tune with emotional signals that others might miss. This is sometimes called hypervigilance, a state where the nervous system is always scanning, always preparing, even when there is no immediate danger. And over time, this constant awareness begins to feel like personality. You may start to believe that you are simply independent, that you don't need much, that relying on others feels unnatural. But underneath that independence, there is often a learned understanding that needs may not be met, that emotions may not be safe to express, that it is better to manage everything alone. So the mind builds quiet defenses. It learns to suppress feelings before they fully surface, to solve problems before asking for help, to stay composed, even when something inside feels heavy. And this adaptation works. It protects, it stabilizes, but it also comes with a quiet cost. Because when a child becomes their own sense of safety, they may never learn what it feels like to truly rest in someone else's care. And so, even in calm moments, even in safe spaces, something inside remains slightly guarded. Not because you want to be distant, but because your mind was trained to never fully let go. There is a quiet contradiction that begins to live inside you. On the surface, you appear steady, capable, grounded, someone others can rely on without hesitation. But beneath that calm exterior, there is movement, a tension that rarely shows itself fully. Because a part of you has learned to be strong, while another part is still waiting to be held. And these two parts don't always understand each other. You may find it difficult to ask for help, even when you need it. Not because you don't feel the weight, but because something inside whispers, you should be able to handle this. Receiving care can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, as if letting someone in means risking disappointment or losing the control that once kept you safe. So you stay composed. You offer support easily but struggle to accept it in return. You listen deeply, but hesitate to speak when it's your turn. And over time, this creates a quiet loneliness, not from the absence of people, but from the absence of being truly seen. Because strength, when carried for too long, can become a kind of isolation. You begin to wonder, why does it feel so hard to rest, to soften, to simply be without holding everything together? And the answer is not weakness. It is not failure. It is the echo of a time when letting go didn't feel safe. So you learned not to. And then, quietly, almost unexpectedly, something begins to shift. Not in a dramatic way, not all at once, but in small, almost unnoticeable moments. You start to feel tired, not physically, but emotionally. Tired of always being the one who holds everything together. Tired of being strong in places where you were never meant to be. And for the first time, a question appears, soft but persistent. Was this ever supposed to be mine to carry? You begin to notice your patterns, how quickly you say, "I'm fine," even when something inside feels heavy. How instinctively you minimize your needs, as if they require justification to exist. And slowly, a deeper awareness unfolds. What once felt like identity begins to feel like adaptation. The independence, the emotional control, the constant awareness. They were not flaws, but they were not entirely you either. They were ways you learned to survive in a space that asked too much, too soon. And this realization can feel complicated. There may be a quiet grief, not just for what happened, but for what never had the chance to happen. A childhood that moved too quickly, needs that were never fully met, moments of softness that were postponed or forgotten. But within that awareness, there is also something else, a gentle opening, the understanding that if these patterns were learned, they can also be understood, softened, slowly and without force released. Not all at once, not perfectly, but enough to begin seeing yourself with a little more honesty and a little more compassion. There is a quiet kind of healing that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive as a breakthrough or a sudden transformation. It begins softly, almost imperceptibly, in the moments where you pause instead of pushing through, where you allow yourself to feel without immediately trying to fix it. For someone who grew up too fast, healing is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to the parts of you that were set aside, the softness, the curiosity, the need to be held without explanation. At first, this return can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because slowing down may bring you face to face with emotions that were once too heavy to carry. Vulnerability may feel like losing control rather than gaining connection. But slowly, something begins to change. You start to realize that strength doesn't have to mean constant endurance, that being okay doesn't require you to carry everything alone. And perhaps, for the first time, you begin to offer yourself what was once missing: patience instead of pressure, understanding instead of dismissal, space instead of expectation. This is not about rewriting the past. It is about meeting yourself in the present with a gentleness that was once unfamiliar. And in doing so, you begin to create something new. Not a perfect version of yourself, but a more whole one. A self that no longer needs to rush, to prove, or to hold everything together. A self that is finally allowed to simply be. If this reflection felt familiar, if something quiet inside you was touched, then perhaps a part of you has been carrying more than it was ever meant to hold. And that part of you, the one that learned to be strong too soon, is not something to fix or erase. It is something to understand, to meet with patience, to hold with care. Because you were never meant to do all of this alone. And even if it has felt that way for a long time, it doesn't make your experience any less human. If you'd like to stay connected, this space will continue to explore the quiet, often unseen patterns of the human mind, a place where emotions are not rushed and where understanding unfolds slowly. And if you feel comfortable, you're allowed to share your thoughts below, not because you have to, but because your words might help someone else feel a little less alone in their own story. Take care of yourself. You deserve gentleness.